The rise of digital banking. The rise of digital banking is one of the most significant developments in the history of global finance. Over the past few decades, advances in technology have transformed the way we think about banking and finance, and many of the traditional banking practices and institutions have been replaced by digital alternatives. One of the earliest examples of digital banking can be traced back to the 1960s, when the first ATM, automated teller machine, was introduced in the United States. The ATM revolutionized the way people accessed their bank accounts, and it paved the way for many other digital banking services. In the 1980s and 1990s, the rise of personal computers and the Internet led to the development of online banking services. Banks began to offer customers the ability to access their accounts, transfer money, and pay bills online, and this became a popular alternative to traditional banking. In the 2000s, the rise of mobile devices and smartphones led to the development of mobile banking services. Banks began to offer customers the ability to access their accounts, transfer money, and pay bills through mobile apps, and this became a popular way to manage finances on the go. Today, many digital banks have emerged as challengers to traditional banks. These digital banks often offer lower fees, better interest rates, and more innovative products and services than traditional banks. The emergence of the first ATM in the 1960s. In the 1960s, a new technology emerged that would revolutionize the way people interacted with their money: the automated teller machine, or ATM. The first ATM was developed by a Scottish inventor named John Shepherd Barron, and was installed in a Barclays Bank branch in London in 1967. But the idea of a machine that could dispense cash automatically had been around for a while. In fact, the first patent for a cash dispensing machine was filed in the United States in 1939 by a man named Luther George Simjian. However, it wasn't until the 1960s that the technology had advanced enough to make the ATM a practical reality. The introduction of the ATM was met with some resistance from people who were skeptical of the idea of a machine handling their money, but it quickly caught on, and by the 1970s, there were tens of thousands of ATMs around the world. The rise of digital banking in the 1960s also saw the introduction of the first credit cards. In 1950, the Diners Club card was introduced, which allowed customers to charge their restaurant bills to a revolving account. American Express followed suit in 1958 with its own credit card. But it wasn't until the 1960s that the use of credit cards really took off. The Bank of America introduced the Bank AmeriCard in 1958, which would later become Visa, and MasterCharge, which would become MasterCard, was introduced in 1966. The 1960s also saw the introduction of the first electronic funds transfer system, which allowed banks to transfer money between accounts electronically. The first system was called FedWire, and it was introduced by the Federal Reserve in 1960. These advancements in digital banking paved the way for the online banking we know today, which allows customers to manage their accounts and make transactions without ever having to set foot in a bank branch. In the 1980s, digital technology was rapidly advancing, and the banking industry was quick to adopt it. Banks began to use computers to manage their accounts and transactions, and soon, they were offering their customers electronic banking services. This marked the beginning of the digital banking era, which revolutionized the industry and paved the way for modern banking. During this time, banks like Citibank and Chase Manhattan Bank were leading the charge in digital banking innovation. Citibank, in particular, was a pioneer in the use of electronic funds transfer, offering customers the ability to transfer funds between accounts electronically. Meanwhile, Chase Manhattan Bank was experimenting with automated teller machines, ATMs, which would allow customers to withdraw cash and perform other transactions without the need for a teller. Other banks were quick to follow suit, and by the end of the decade, many banks were offering their customers a range of electronic services, including online banking, electronic bill payment, and telephone banking. The emergence of online banking. As the Internet began to gain popularity in the 1990s, banks saw an opportunity to offer their customers even more convenient and efficient services. In 1994, the first online bank, First Virtual, was launched, allowing customers to conduct transactions over the Internet. Other banks soon followed suit, and by the late 1990s, online banking had become a standard offering from most major banks. Online banking allowed customers to check their account balances, transfer funds, pay bills, and even apply for loans from the comfort of their own homes. Banks such as Wells Fargo and Bank of America were at the forefront of this digital transformation, and they invested heavily in developing their online banking platforms. These investments paid off as customers flocked to the convenience of online banking. The emergence of ATMs and debit cards in the 1990s. While online banking was revolutionizing the way customers interacted with their banks, the 1990s also saw significant advancements in other electronic banking services, such as ATMs and debit cards. ATMs had been around since the 1970s, but it wasn't until the 1990s that they really began to take off. This was due in large part to the introduction of shared networks, which allowed customers to use ATMs at other banks without incurring high fees. At the same time, debit cards were becoming increasingly popular, as they offered customers a more convenient and secure way to make purchases than carrying cash. Banks such as Bank of America and Chase were among the first to offer debit cards, and by the end of the decade, they had become a ubiquitous feature of the banking landscape. Globalization and deregulation. The 1980s and 1990s were also marked by significant changes in the banking industry on a global scale. The deregulation of the financial sector in the 1980s and the growth of globalization led to the emergence of new financial products and services, such as derivatives and securitization. Banks and financial institutions that led the way in globalization and deregulation, such as J.P. Morgan and Citigroup, became some of the most influential players in the global economy. These institutions were able to take advantage of the new financial landscape to expand their operations and increase their profits. The emergence of new financial products and services. As the banking industry became increasingly global and deregulated, new financial products and services began to emerge. Overall, the emergence of online banking in the 1980s and 1990s represented a major shift in the banking industry, as banks began to embrace new technologies and offer customers more convenient ways to manage their finances. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share, and comment below if you have any opinion on the content.